here. I want to welcome all of you. It's such a pleasure seeing everybody. And I mean to tell you, the doors are beginning to open wide, and that light at the end of the tunnel has gotten a lot brighter. And I'm just so excited about our future. I have an inspirational program for you this month. Drew Hill sent an article to me that she had written, and I was so touched by it. I wanted to share a bit of it with you because it'll sort of prime us for Andy's talk. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read this little article by Drew Hill. It's called The Art of Discovery. In watercolor, we often talk of happy accidents as the water and paint mingle on the paper, taking us in surprising directions that we hadn't planned. These accidents, some happier than others, are little discoveries. However, if you are risk averse and more interested in success than widening your world, it can be very scary to take chances and make discoveries. It's just a piece of paper, she says. She said, I often told students as they looked immobilized by that blank surface. But to help students, I help them learn how to plan with thumbnail sketches, composition, value studies, palette development. I say successful discovery is 2 parts plan, 1 part the universe having its way with you. That's the exciting part. And 1 part attitude. Attitude is key to trying something new, discovering new ways to create art. Attitude is key to something new, discovering new ways to see the world, discovering new things about yourself. Let me share just a few ways to temper your attitude toward discovering if you are risk averse. Success can be learning something new. Not every new thing is something you want to repeat. So you have successfully learned not to do that thing again. Success can be not getting your expected result, but successfully finding a new, interesting direction for investigation. Success can be enjoying playfulness. Success can be learning something new about yourself. The practice of creating art requires discovery, continually, ongoing, as long as you face that blank surface. And I've ad-libbed a little bit here. And most importantly, I added those words, having fellow explorers with you on your voyage of discovery is a wonderful thing. SAWG is that group of fellow explorers. Take classes, join groups, watch demonstrations, work on a committee, docent in the gallery, and make new friends. SAWG is your tribe. In conclusion, I wish you all a delightful voyage of discovery on your art journey. I don't know, that just touched me, and I wanted to share that with you. And I hope you like that.
Yeah.
Look, business. This Saturday, we'll be collecting donations for the sidewalk sale the following Saturday, which is April the 24th. So this Saturday from 9 to 12, your sidewalk sale committee will be collecting stuff. Just show up at the back door, drive up, we'll help you carry it out of your car if you want, and we're going to dump it in the gallery. What I ask you is make sure you bring it this Saturday. We cannot accept last-minute donations on the day of the sale because we need time to organize and price things, and we can't be doing that and conducting the sale. So please be thoughtful about that. I've got my car loaded with books and supplies and stuff that I cleaned out my studio the other day. And I'm going to take them down there on Wednesday, so I'm not dealing with that at the last minute. Because Sue and I are going to be down there meeting our new house cleaner. We hired a new house cleaner who also cleans for Larson Baker, our landlord. And we're going to show him the ropes, show him what we have, see what he needs. And I'm just delighted. He's going to start officially in June and clean the gallery every 2 weeks. And I'm going to have him clean the gallery sort of first time in preparation for the sidewalk sale, because I want to have the gallery open that day. There are going to be people out in the front sidewalk hawking, saying, come on, we're going to sidewalk sale in the back. Come on through the gallery. And if you volunteer to help at that day, you can hang a painting in the gallery in the middle room that's sort of empty right at the moment. And Sue Rumsey is going to be our cashier for the day. She's been trained on the new system. And she's even bringing her daughter to help. So I hope you will participate and help us if you can. So we did that, we planned. The other good news is we're working hard and refreshing our COVID procedures and everything so that we can open the gallery officially for the 2 summer shows in July. We'll open in June to have training of docents, if we can get docents who are willing to be trained. Think about this: if you enter the show and you get and you want to, normally we always have somebody be docents that are in the show, and we need a docent coordinator to do that, because one of our past docent coordinator, Kathy McLean, has stepped up to a bigger role, but I'll tell you about that after Karen does her nominating committee stuff. Karen, are you ready to tell our membership who is going to be nominated for the positions? Where are you, Karen?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
On my screen, I'm next to you. Okay, here's what we have so far. And Pat Inman, Sue Rumsey started off on the committee, but had to leave for other reasons, and did a lot of work. Pat did a lot of calling, as did I, but here's what we've ended up with. And I hope I still have it accurate. President will be Kay Sullivan. So that was an easy slot to fill. We still do not have a VP of programs, but we did ask a lot of people, and it's hard to get across to them how really it's one of the easiest jobs to have. The VP of shows will be Tad Lamb, and assistant VP of shows is Kathy McLean. The secretary opening came up very shortly before needing to have this ballot done. So I'm going to step in as acting secretary, but I'm looking each one of you in the eye. So whoever wants to be the secretary, all you have to do is raise your hand. One of us will see you. Treasurer is Sue Emer. Member at large will be Paula Weech, Sandra Montgomery, and PJ Cathy. And I think they're all, I don't know if they're all here tonight or not, but that is our ballot, folks. So VP of programs is open, easy job, still available. Secretary, I will do it. Basically, you take notes and you write up minutes. That's it. So for the board meeting and the general meeting, mainly the board meeting. I don't think you do minutes.
We haven't been doing minutes for the general meeting.
Okay, so just the board meeting. So so feel free to step up, because I'm also president of the Saddlebrook Fine Arts Guild. And although it doesn't take up my entire life, some days it feels like it does. And sometimes I feel like a nut. And anyway, that's it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Karen, Pat Inman, and Sue for a little bit. We really appreciate the effort. I know how challenging it is to make those phone calls, but it's also rewarding. What I found last year before I became president was calling folks to say, are you still willing to do this? Are you still willing to do that? And they were not necessarily the board positions, but all
Right.
the key volunteer positions. And I got to meet people on the phone, and it was very rewarding. I learned a lot about it. So with the thought of volunteerism, I would remind you that this is your tribe. And right now, financially, we're really in good shape. We've had some amazing, generous donations, and I won't say names because they know who they are. And I can't tell you how heartwarming that is. And but we need docents for the summer shows. We need a bin rental coordinator when we open, because the bins are still there. And we need show chairs and a docent coordinator. So if you can help, we'd really appreciate it. And call me if you have questions, because I can explain. I have all the job descriptions. They're actually on our drive under the policies and procedures document that is online. Okay, fundraising, I should say. We have a new donation page, and we worked hard to make this happen. We spent a little bit of money to make it happen, but it was so hard for people to find, where do I donate? You know, it was sort of on that lower left-hand corner of the About Us page, and then you couldn't specify what you wanted to do. So we set it up so that you can buy your Jim Click tickets that are now available. And you can, that goes to the scholarship fund, or you can pick a fund which is important to you. If you want to help with the summer shows for awards, if you want to donate to the gallery for expenses. So check out the new part of the website for there. And speaking of money, May 31st is a deadline for your dues renewal. I appreciate everybody that's already paid their dues, but you'll see this again in the sketchbook on the 1st of May. So write yourself a note to renew your dues. They're the same as they've always been. Well, since I've been in, $50 and $25 for students. Okay, let's see. Many years ago, far, far away, probably 15 years ago, I was in Karen Brungunt's role. I was president of the Saddlebrook Fine Arts Guild. And during that time, we had general meetings also, and we'd invite people to speak. And we invited Andy Rush, who is founder and CEO Emeritus of the Drawing Studio. He gave us such an inspirational talk. And he said, you guys have grown so much, it's time for you to give back to the community. And his talk spawned us to do an outreach program. And 4 or 5 members of the Art Guild went to Desert Point, now called Fairwinds, an assisted living place down here in Oro Valley, and offered free art classes to the residents. It was probably one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my art life. And Andy was responsible for making that happen. And I want to thank him for that. But because he influenced us so much, I asked him to speak with us today. He's had 6 decades on his websites. He talks about his art life. And he's now retired as the CEO of the Drawing Studio, but he continues to teach. And I'll let him share his wisdom with you and let him tell you more about his art life. Sue is going to share the screen so everybody can see. And Andy, are you ready for us?
I am, and welcome. This is an odd thing, this online stuff. On the one hand, I've been teaching online. I don't know if any of you have been. And Tad, you're there. Have you been teaching online as well? Tad, are you there? Well, that's right. You got your thing shut down. So.
Yeah, I've been teaching virtually.
Right. So it's a strange space to be with you this way, in the sense that on the one hand, we see each other's faces. It's as though we were sitting between 3 and 4 feet apart from each other, right? And so it's like this online business is very intimate on one hand. And on the other hand, like who's here from Alabama, and so it has this. We're very far away in actual physical life, many of us, and so there's this sense of closeness, and then this fact that we're not in the same room with each other. And also, I want to point out that I know that there are men among us, but in large part, what I have noticed in the drawing studio as well as in my past teaching life, it's the women who are mostly the ongoing and year after year students of the nature of visual intelligence, whether studying painting, watercolor, sculpture, whether at the drawing studio or with the Watercolor Guild or with the Paperworks or with the other arts organizations. And I just want to point out that I think right now in our lifetime, the women are the cutting edge of new learning. And I recommend all the men I know stay close to the women and watch how they study and watch how they take on new things, because we guys have a lot to learn from you gals. And so it's a very interesting that there are so many women now who are the leading edge of the work and art in our life. And I know from my experience at the drawing studio, I'm seeing just absolutely great new thinking, new ways of working, new inspiration coming from so many women in midlife and on, that I feel like I'm now at the age of 89. I am the new student. So it's interesting to talk to the people that I consider my teachers now. So first of all, I know most of you know a little about me, but let me say something about the drawing studio. Years ago, I taught at the University of Arizona when I first came to Arizona. I came from Italy, where I had been for a few years learning printmaking, learning how to speak decent Italian. And I was at the point where I thought I was going to actually move my life to live in Italy, because I found everything that I had been looking for so much in many of the qualities of Italian life. But meanwhile, I had a new kid and a new wife, and I got an offer to teach drawing for a year at the University of Arizona, because there was a sudden influx of many more students than they were prepared for, and it was November, and yet they hired me from Italy, and so I came into a very unknown situation to teach drawing at first, and so then I stayed 12 years in that, and became a professor and became known to a lot of people, and eventually started the printmaking department there. This was between 1959 and 1971. But I found myself restless. I actually did not enjoy the kind of university politics and the kind of people I met there who were all arguing and worried about tenure more than they seemed to be engaged in the adventure of art in the world of our time. And so with 4 kids and no money and a lot of trepidation, and after 12 years at the university, I quit. You can imagine, I was a young hotshot. I had tenure. I taught 2 days a week. I had everything that every young artist wanted for their life. And there it was, I quit. But I had a sense that I needed to find out something new about the world, that I didn't feel like as long as I was at the university, I was going to get caught up in the culture of that institution rather than finding my own way. So not long after, I joined Charles Littler in buying and founding and developing Rancho Linda Vista, where I still live after 52 years. And it's a community where none of us owns our own houses. Where I actually learned what a joy it is to visit the studios of other artists on a frequent basis and see what they're doing and talk about what's important to us and support them in their work as they supported me in mine. And I realized that in the arts anyway, after school is over, musicians work with each other all their lives. And theater people work with each other all their lives, and dancers work with each other all their lives. But the people in the visual arts, for the most part, after they finish school, go off and work alone in a room. And my experience at Rancho Linda Vista was that's really a slow way to go. By having a community and by having other people who are every bit as good as what they do as what I do, that community just made all the difference in my own work, and I could see that immediately. So after I quit the university for 10 years, I was invited by and large, or it was known that I was a good teacher, and that I was invited at different schools around the country to come and teach for 3 months or a year or a special workshop. So I, for 10 years, taught at places like Colorado College, like the University of Denver, like Ohio State, like Santa Barbara, UC at Santa Barbara, and other such schools, the University of Arkansas, where I actually had an overview of how we are teaching art in our time. And the thing I realized in the course of that 10 years was that art belonged, if you've noticed in the world we live in, we are, when I came to Tucson in '59, most of the communication media was what I call linear. That is, like our schools, it was reading, writing, and arithmetic. There was very little what I call visual learning, if any. And it's because we have a tradition in the Western world, at least, in which we basically consider our universities basically linear learning. That is philosophy, reading and writing, oral history. But there's the study of the arts. It was considered to be a specialist. We called it, you had to have talent for it. And it wasn't expected that everybody had that talent. And so it was basically relegated to, in the early days, art institutes. And then when the GI Bill came, the government wouldn't pay for you to go to school at an art institute, but they would pay if you went to the University of Michigan. So very quickly, all the universities around the country after the Second World War began to establish art departments so that the GI Bill could be valid for GIs coming back from the war who were interested in studying the visual arts. And so by now, I would say 80%, if you really look at the world you live in, 80% of all communication is now visual. And that was not true 50 years ago. And you need to get that. It's something that's very important to grasp, that there's a wildly transformational process going on in our culture, and it's worldwide. And it has to do with that the ways that we communicate with each other now are a very rich amalgam of not just visual and not just movement like dance and not just music, but all of it taken together. And that we still do not teach art in the schools with any serious way. And we still certainly don't teach it in the sense that I think we should be learning it, which is a broader sense of the three-dimensionality of learning. It's in our time now. And so that anyway, the drawing studio was my my experiment in what would it be like if we actually said learning art is a general subject. Anybody who has even a mild interest of it can learn it, because as you guys here in this group know, art, making art, it has a curriculum. It has things you have to know to develop skills. It has a language, it has a grammar, it has a syntax, it has a history, and all of those things help develop a visual vocabulary just in the way we develop a written vocabulary or an oral vocabulary. I mean, imagine if you had to live your life with the vocabulary that you had when you were 10 years old. Imagine if you would, could you then be a Immanuel Kant, or could you be a person teaching any particular subject if you did not have a huge vocabulary to allow you to make very accurate distinctions? So, but mostly if you guys are practicing artists, and especially if you sometimes sell your art, you know very well that you're working in a world that doesn't have a very big visual vocabulary among most people. Most people think that the photograph is the source of what we see, which is a product of the last 100 years, and most people are when they work and paint are often use photographs rather than learning the process of looking at the world for yourself. So there's a very, we who are artists live in a very interesting world that has not developed a visual understanding very far. For example, I'm a basketball fan. One of my kids played a lot of basketball. I never did, but I love the game. And one of the things I noticed between going to a live basketball game and a television basketball game is that the television game, the camera controls what I get to see. I can't look anywhere on the court and see how the defense is setting up while the basket's being made at the other end of the court, or listen to how the coach is talking to his players at the break. What I get to watch is the ball, and the camera follows the ball. And then when they call timeout, then the camera goes to Pepsi Cola ads, so I don't get to see anything at all. So I'm a product of camera looking as far as basketball goes, so long as I only watch television. So the issue I find in talking about art and what it is is that first of all, I think it should be a general subject. I think it should be taught to all of our children on a regular basis in the same way we teach reading and writing and arithmetic. I think that we who practice art should share what we practice with our children. If those of you who have kids and grandkids, don't take them with you on some of your outings, I say shame on you. Because once your 10-year-old get that you love to make art as every bit as much as they do as children, something changes in their seriousness when they get to see that you're as serious about it as they are. So the drawing studio has become a place that allows those of us who have other professions, we're mothers and we're professional workers and we're lawyers and doctors and carpenters, and we have all kinds of things we do in life, some of them to make a living, but our practice of art is every bit as serious as if we were professional. We practice art just the way I practice yoga or meditation or swimming or other things that are important to me. That is, I don't need to be a professional yoga teacher in order to practice yoga, nor do I need to be a professional artist in order to make watercolors or paintings. If it's something that I do, then I need to design how I include it in my life and how I make it work around everything else that I do. The first thing, of course, is to get that making art basically means, can you work by yourself alone in a room for a long period of time? Do you know how to pay attention over time? Have you developed a sufficient number of skills using the materials that you have used so that it becomes natural to you? For instance, when I go out to paint watercolors, I have a palette that I've used for 50 years. I put myself sitting on a rock. I put my paper in front of me on a board. I put my palette to my right, and that's the last time I look at my palette, because after years of painting, I know where every color is. I don't need to look down there every time I put my brush down. I do a little, but basically I know where everything is. So we have to, the first thing is you got to look to see if you've designed a ritual for how you work, and the skills of working with some simple materials that you keep simple so that you don't have to pay a lot of attention to all the techniques, so that you can actually look out on the world and see something new. So there's a process that and also the drawing studio provides company. I think, as you guys probably know, teachers are valuable because teachers can design a kind of a ritual way of working that lets you work on one thing at a time. But basically, working in community is everything I've ever learned. I've learned from all my friends. And so I think that that probably is true for you too. All right, so enough of the introduction. Now, Sue, are you ready? Okay. So what I'm going to do is would you take the camera off of me, and I'm going to start showing you some things. And Sue, the first thing I'd like you to put up is I have one watercolor by John Singer Sargent. Could you put that up, please? Great. Okay, so I won't keep this long, but I wanted to put this one watercolor up, partly because John Singer Sargent was the first person to really invent using watercolor with any degree of originality and authenticity. What you need to, if you don't know this, what is useful to remember is that until we had the tube, the lead tube, and until we had colors that were invented by the new coal tar industry, artists had like Rubens or the early Renaissance artists, Piero della Francesca, Michelangelo, they had really only a very limited number of colors. They had maybe 2 reds, maybe 1 or 2 blues, maybe viridian, maybe a little bit of ultramarine, yellow ochre. They didn't have any really bright yellow, and the most intense red they had was a crimson red made out of the coccinea bugs. But for example, when Rubens painted, his paintings were very dark because he wanted to show off the brilliance of the carmine red that he had, and that red on a value scale was already quite dark of its nature. So the only way you could get that red to sing was that if you had everything else much darker. But in Van Gogh's time, in the time around what we call the Impressionists, was also the time of the Industrial Revolution. And so all of a sudden, there were not only brighter colors available, but there were a way to mix them up so that you didn't have to stay in your studio and mix and use the colors up before they dried out at the end of the day. You could actually put them in a tube and keep them usable and wet, and then go out into the world and paint outside with the tubes that you brought along with you. So that idea of painting outside, looking at the real world, is relatively new. We don't see much of that until the 18th century or so, and into the early 19th century. That's where we start to see people actually looking at the world. And John Singer Sargent was one of those. However, Sargent, as you know, who lived in Europe most of his life with his family, basically invented how to work with watercolors. The only other people working with watercolors with any degree of skill was Vincent van Gogh. And actually Vincent van Gogh and John Singer Sargent, they knew of each other. They did not know each other personally. Van Gogh, of course, was considered to be a primitive and a wild man, and not part of the tradition of painting in Europe quite, partly because he was himself working. Those of you who paint watercolors know that, we work out of different parts of our brain, and the place that we work with with color and emotional feeling and using the brush as a kind of a sculptural tool, so that the way we slap the painting down on the paper or canvas is part of the language of learning to paint, and that's relatively new. And Van Gogh was one of our teachers of that, but Sargent was not. On the other hand, he really did understand, if you're looking at this painting, as you can see, it's a very beautifully constructed. It's all rectangular. He uses the windows and the shapes of the buildings and the long layer of blue-green water. You're looking at something that could be a Mondrian in another lifetime, or it could be something made by the compositional skills of the Bauhaus. So he belonged to the geometric world that came out of Greece and into the Western tradition of painting. Okay, so now I want you to put up, if you would, dear, put up any of the Georgia O'Keeffe work, maybe the one that's called O'Keeffe Birch Tree. Good. So now we're looking, Sue, can we make this any bigger, or is this the size that we're going to be working with? It's all right, but I don't know if there's a place on the view that I use on when I have things up that it has a fill the screen instruction so that you can make it big. Can you do that or not? Great, thank you, good, all right. Okay, so now Georgia O'Keeffe, if any of you have studied her work with any degree of intensity, know that she, up until 1840, so she lived in New York, or she taught school in Texas for a while, and she was, of course, her mentor was Joseph Stiglitz, the photographer, who eventually became her lover, and eventually they married and had a very stormy relationship over the years, one way or the other. But he was the early one to recognize that she could draw like you couldn't believe. He loved her drawings, and he had a show of her drawings early on in New York City, when not only were there not very many women artists, but women who had a strong abstract sense of how to make work. You just did not find women doing that. Women had often were, if you came from a rich family, you lived in a culture that you learned how to maybe crochet or play a little piano or paint a little painting, because wealthy women with a family to take care of were expected to have these little domestic arts, but they were not taken seriously. And so O'Keeffe certainly came out of that world, but she took it very seriously. And so Stiglitz was the first to recognize that. So here, so then I'm going to read you something while we have Georgia O'Keeffe up on the screen. This is something she said about abstraction. She said, "It is surprising to me how many people separate the objective from the abstract. Objective painting is not good painting unless it is good in the abstract sense. A hill or a tree cannot make a good painting just because it is a hill or a tree. It is lines and colors put together so that they say something. For me, that is the very basis of painting. The abstraction is often the most definite form for the intangible thing in myself that I can only clarify when I paint." So she had an understanding really early on of what we all have been coming to, only slowly, and only that the nature of the way in which we make things is ultimately what keeps something around. In other words, your picture of your dog or your mother or the plant outside your window or even the cactus when you go out and paint in the desert, as long as you are focusing on making it look like something real, you're not paying attention to what she calls, what Georgia O'Keeffe here calls, the nature of abstraction. So as we look at this canvas, you can see that first of all, she limits the color, does she not? And she limits how the tree form rises up and how she uses it to create a series of shapes and patterns that interact and go back and forth in a kind of visual symphony in which we can understand she uses the tree trunks and she uses leaves, but she's also engaged in light and keeping the palette very simple. So the only reason that Georgia O'Keeffe is around now is because she came to the Southwest out of the city, and once she had left the city, she basically hardly went. I mean, she went back for shows, but her world became the natural world of the Southwest, the one you and I live in. And out of that inspired her for the rest of her life. So let's look at a few more things of hers now. Whatever you have there, dear. Thank you. All right, so here is a painting that she calls a Black Cross. When she went to Taos and Santa Fe, she found the relationship of the church and the crosses and the landscape interactive. So we're looking here at not just a cross which was a very real cross that lived in the church that she visited often, but it was also the mountains around, and in this case, a sunset. So there's a monumentality and a strength and a darkness and the feeling of the intimation of light that is pure Georgia O'Keeffe. And as far as I'm concerned, once I saw this painting, I've been thinking about this painting for the rest of my life. I have not ever forgotten this painting. It's something that I just so am thrilled that she painted and that she was alive to inspire me and what I do. Okay, another one. So until Georgia O'Keeffe, there were very few artists who saw in the bones of the cattle business an art subject. She led us all in this matter. And here is something that you can clearly, it's like a flag. In other words, we have red, white, and blue, don't we? And she was wide aware of that she was relating to the American flag. She knew that perfectly well. And then also the formality of it, the dead centeredness of it. And also the sweep of the blue with the strokes moving upward. And then the edge of the horns of the skull holding the top to keep us centered on a very formal frontal moment. There's another skull somewhere, I think, Sue, if you can find it. With a flower and a landscape. And also, as those of you, if you study Georgia O'Keeffe, you know that she became interested in skies as a subject. And I don't know any other artist before her who understood the nature of skies as a subject. She did several, multiple triptychs, each of them like 12 feet long, that hung together in a huge expanse of blue sky and clouds. That is that I've never changed how I see skies. Ever since I saw them, my skies are now deeply a part of my understanding of life. I think, is there one other Georgia O'Keeffe in my collection here? I think there's one more, but I don't remember now if we've seen them all. Okay, maybe that was it. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is introduce you to Charles Birchfield. Let's put up, there's one called Sunspots. Do you see that one, Sue? Let's put that one up. And let's enlarge it if we can. All right, now I can't ask you to answer me, but I do ask you the question and you can tell. Do you know who Charles Birchfield is? I find in my own interaction with people about him that maybe if you've studied art history, you might have run into him, but many people, even watercolors, do not know who Charles Birchfield is. So let me talk a little bit about him. First of all, he's an American artist. He was born in Ohio. He didn't go to Europe until he was in his 50s. And yet Alfred Barr, when they first established the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in the early, I think it was 20s or 30s, Charles Birchfield was the first American artist to have a one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art. And it was because, it was basically because he didn't develop in the European way at all. He was, and his father really was not interested in him becoming an artist at all. But Charles persevered, and so finally his father allowed him to go from the little town south of Cleveland where they lived. He allowed him to go to Cleveland Art Institute, and to learn to draw there. And so at 19, Charles Birchfield went to school at the Academy, Cleveland Academy at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And there he got a job as a guard standing in the museum's collection of Chinese art. Now, as some of you, if you come from that part of the world or have visited that part of the world, you know that the Cleveland Museum has one of the largest and most complete collections of Chinese painting in the world. So there is Charles Birchfield, 5 days a week in the big cloudy shoes that guards wear to keep their feet comfortable, standing there in the rooms that had the Chinese, the large, long scrolls of Chinese watercolors, where he's there for over a year. So this is an artist, because when I look at an artist who doesn't work like me or doesn't work like anything I know, the question I have is, where did he get his first ideas? And so what I realized about Charles Birchfield is he did not get that kind of geometric style of composing that we saw in the first thing I showed you of John Singer Sargent. He got his first understanding from Chinese painting. And as you may know, if you spend any time studying Chinese watercolor, they did not think of a picture as a window. That was a European idea. They thought of a picture as a lifetime narration, in which one of the reasons that they were often long scrolls was that you were expected, like a movie, to spend 2 or 3 hours with that particular painting, so that you would follow along where everybody's eating at the little restaurant, and then farther down the line in the painting they're walking along the river, and then farther down in the painting they're sitting with their friends in a garden. So there's a enjoyment of the painting as a constant narrative that gave you not just things to look at, but unexpected plants and flowers and skies and so forth. And Birchfield was just a master of that. So absolutely a master of that. And he's one of the artists that influenced me very early on in my life to understand that watercolor painting is not about making pictures that look like photographs, but rather it's a way to explore the interaction between your inside life and your outside life. And I find that this could well have been something inspired by our desert, don't you think? That these are the kind of plants that I see in my walks around the desert. Once you get rid of cactus and horizon line and mountains and skies up there and the grounds down there and all of that, and you begin to actually look at the microcosm where we live, then you begin to understand who a Charles Birchfield was. So let's go on, Sue. Let's look at a few more things. Just pick one. I don't care which one you pick. So this has to do with trees and winter and the light of winter. And he worked by the way, he worked only in watercolor, and he worked often. He would pick up a picture that he had done 13 years ago and rework it when he saw something else he wanted to do. So his work was out of time. He also did things where he combined 2 paintings by sewing them together, and then making a third painting 12 or 13 years later out of work that he had started earlier in his life. Okay, let's look at a few more. And this is astonishing. So this is a summer light picture he did in the summer. And I think this is 2 paintings at one time. I think if you look about a third of the way up, you can see a slight edge where you can see it was sewn together. Okay, blow that up a little bit. So Birchfield went to Europe finally when he was about 55 or 60. But by then he was completely shaped and formed by his own way of working. Okay, so let's look at one more. This is winter. And you can see that he's aware of the energy of nature, the sense of it, it's all about the flow of life from one thing to another. You know, we know now that trees talk to each other. We know now that there are things going on in the natural world that we learn only by living closely to it and in it for a long time. Certainly I have. So this is an amazing. And these are amazing explorations of Charles Birchfield that have inspired me in my work to look the same way. Okay, so now I'm going to show you some things I've done. First of all, may I ask Kay, I notice it's 10 of 5. Can you give me 15 more minutes, you guys, or is that too much? Somebody tell me.
I think you're good. We still have kept, out of 48 people, 47 people are here. So shall we keep going? We shall go, keep going. If they want to.
Okay, so now I may go a little faster than I had intended. I always have this happen to me, but as some of you who knew my wife, Ann Wooden, who was an incredible woman, an incredible writer, and the other half of my life for 50 years. And she passed away at the age of 91 about 4 years ago. And my life has not been the same ever since. But she and I used to take walks in the desert on a regular basis. And while I was out kind of looking at the horizon for my next watercolor or my next painting, she was picking things up off the ground, looking at with a much more intimate and casual eye, putting things in her pocket, little pieces of grasses and little things that she would keep in her pocket, seeds and lichen and so forth. And she would bring them home, and very often I would find a bouquet she made out of her day's findings on the dinner table. So after she passed away, I stopped taking the walks and for about a year. And then I began to think, well, I'll go out and walk like Ann and I used to. But I began to see the desert, my desert here at this 5,000 feet altitude, with a little more like Ann saw it, in the kind of micro level of the desert. Began to notice things that I hadn't noticed until I remembered, and kind of in a crazy way, I began to say, Ann would like to see this. I'll bring some of those home, and I'll bring some of those home, as if she were still in my life and was going to be looking at these things. So it's silly, I know, but there I was trying to bring Ann things to see. And then slowly I began to see the desert differently, and I began to take out large sacks of paper and bringing home grasses and seeds and stones and plants and so forth. And I bring them to my studio, and I began to lay them out on large sheets of watercolor paper, sometimes spraying them with color, sometimes using my etching press to pass them through so that they would imprint onto the paper, sometimes with a color, sometimes using them as a stencil. And then I would eventually, by taking like sometimes 20 different levels, going through the thing over and over again, I would find myself creating large watercolor, the kind of monoprint watercolors, using my years of printmaking, but also the things I was learning by learning at the world as Ann saw them. So now let's look at a few of these. I'm just going to let you. Well, I wanted to start with the one called the green trees. That one, yes. Could you blow that up a minute? So those of you who do not know my my traditional style of watercolor painting, this is pretty typical of how I paint. And I almost always only paint watercolors from life. I hardly ever do anything in the studio, as I'm doing now with the new works. But I think you can see something of the new work in how I tend to work, where I find something that has my attention for 4 or 5 hours. In this case, the relationship of black to green to yellow in a sycamore forest that was very bright that day. Okay, so now let's go and now I want to look at some of the new work. So Okay, so can you blow that up, please? So as you can see here, you're looking at, I don't touch these watercolors at all. They're made completely by laying on colors with grasses and leaves and seeds, and then often taking what I do in one pass of my press and then putting it up on my wall. And when I can see something else I want to do, then I'll do that. For instance, I laid two glasses after in the second or third thing in which I put the two glasses on the watercolor paper and put the paper into a large photographic tray. And then I put only the top third of the paper into the tray. And then I poured a dark blue, I poured a light blue, which produced the quality. And then I poured the dark blue. But of course, under the glasses, the dark blue didn't flow. And so I got this sense of a sphere. So this is made completely by letting the grasses and whatever other objects I use do the work. So I'm kind of like the organizer or the director of the image, but the mark making is being done completely by the things I find in the desert, or when I use things like a glass or so. So let's do another one. Okay, so this is a little smaller one. Sometimes the one you just looked at was about 36 inches high. This is about 18 inches wide. And so here, the little circles are places where I laid coins, and then eventually 2 coins, and then letting, for example, the color of the black line on the top third was by letting the gray color that you see below that black line, letting it dry, putting it in a little photo tray and letting it dry overnight so that the black crept toward the edge where it was dried and then dries quite black there, but leaves itself gray where where it passed toward the edge. So it's been like in 20 or 30 different processes. Let's do another one. Okay, this is one I called God Gives You One. Every now and then in doing this work, I took some very large pieces of grasses and I spread them out on a damp piece of watercolor paper. I used about 280-pound watercolor paper, and I put I can't remember what the white was, but in any event, I sprayed the paper several times, and the white is where the grasses block the color from going down on the paper, and the white kind of orb is where I had some kind of circle like a glass sitting there while I sprayed the blue. And so I had sprayed this with about 3 or 4 colors, changing the grasses slightly. You can see that there's a lot of grasses that are quietly in the cream lower 2/3 of it, and then I pass it through the press once, and as a friend of mine says, every now and then God gives you one. And so without ever messing with this, I put it aside, and then I went to work on it about a week later. And when I got it out, I said, I think it's done. I think it's one of those God gives you one pictures. So indeed, a very good collector of mine bought it off my studio wall when she saw it not long after I did it. So okay, so let's do another one. Okay, sometimes I work smaller. This is about 18 inches wide, and you can see the grasses here, and you can see where I used grasses both like to color them and then let the press impress them into the picture. But you can see there's some brown grasses and some black grasses, and then some places where I blocked with I think I used sawdust for blocking things, and I let the image tell me where to go next. So this went through about, I would say, 6 different layers using different grasses every time. And at a certain point, it looked complete to me. So it's about 15 by 18. Let's do another one. So this is about, again, it's probably 16 by 15. Again, the lower area is leaves that I soaked in black and laid them over an area where I had done leaves that I'd soaked in green. And then the middle is a series of orange and yellow shapes that I got another way, and so forth. So again, I don't paint anything you're looking at. I let the grasses do the work, and I respond to what happens in one movement by adding or subtracting, by adding a color or another kind of image or grasses in the other, in other steps. This is 36 inches high. And again, here is one that I let the upper gray area, I let the paper slide into a photo tray in which I had some shapes lying around, and I just used a gray and left it overnight to create the kind of sense of drying, so that it produces these very interesting edges. The grasses I used in the middle area where I I only sprayed that part of the paper and left the grasses on it, and then I think I remember I put a piece of cardboard over it and passed it through my press to let the grasses impress their color on the paper. Okay, another. So it's hard for me to tell you how something like this is made. This was a 34 inches wide, except that I use different grasses and leaves and flowers, and I often let the color soak. I put it through the press with the leaves acting as the kind of white area here, where I had the lower area sprayed with green and the upper area sprayed with some orange and ochre. The right side I did with darker colors. Again, it's like in 8 or 9 different processes. Very often I'll go a certain distance and take a look at it and pin it up on my wall, and then maybe 3 days later, it occurs to me, oh, we need some orange. So sometimes it doesn't come for 2 weeks. Next one. This one is about 18 inches by 24 inches wide. A friend of mine asked me about the circles in all of these work, and I went back looking at my prints from my past life and found I've often used circles like this. The ones you see here, I'm using glasses and I'm using washers, and I use different round things which I put on the paper when I let them soak or pass them through the press. But I had an interesting death experience when I was 12 years old, and I got very serious pneumonia. And my mother thought I had passed away, that I was gone. And I remember that time, it was during the war, and she was living alone, and she had a job in Toledo, Ohio, and didn't know anybody there. And I was aware, I was in a coma, but I was aware that I was standing on or was a kind of gray sphere that was luminous from the inside. And there were a lot of them around me, and that we were all going somewhere. All of these dark spheres were going somewhere. And I was clear that I really enjoyed where we were going, and I was in love, and I was feeling safe, and this was a passage that was going on. And during that kind of dreamlike state, I could hear my mother's voice. She'd found a doctor in the middle of the war, which was unusual. And I heard this voice say that I'd never heard before, saying, "I think he's going to make it. He's sweating now." And at that moment, then I heard my mother crying. And so then there was this sense that I had to come back. And I remember the feeling of not wanting to come back. If you've ever pulled weeds the morning after a rain when the grass has been stuck, and how easily the weeds pull out, but if you let them go another day or two, they'll still come, but it's much harder to pull them out. And it was kind of like that to make myself turn around. I had to literally pull myself out of my deep wanting to go that direction. And so back I came, and ever since then, there's something about those orbs that is dear to me. And so somebody, when I told that story, pointed out how many there were in these works, these recent works, where I'm getting used to the fact that Anne died and she's not with me anymore. And I'm looking at my own death at 89 pretty carefully, frankly. Okay, a couple more, dear. This one I did a little differently. I took some, at some point I took some masking tape and laid it on the dry paper after it had some of the gray and some of the yellow. I put the masking tape on, and those are the tree forms you see. The trunks of the trees were actually that way. And then I added leaves that I had sprayed green, and then I added other black acrylic that is in the lower third of this image, while the tape was on the image, and passed that through the press. So this was a little more kind of conventional in terms of the image that came out of my study of trees out here. This one is being shown down in Tubac right now. I'm showing 4 of the night skies, the one having to do with the night skies that's opening in a show at the Heritage Society in Tubac for the next 4 months. So this is an example of that. And then maybe one more, Stu, and then we'll stop. Yeah, this will be fine. So I haven't been making conventional watercolors lately, but this is what I'm doing. I'm really engaged in this way of working. It's a hard time because the desert is so dry and there are no new grasses at all. So it's I'm actually walking far afield. I went up to the Boyce Thompson Arboretum the other day to see what's there. So I'm looking at new forms because there's in my desert out here, the oaks are dying, the mesquites haven't come out yet. It's if you don't live in the city, this drought is real and very scary indeed. Where we're going to get our water from in the next few years, God knows. We've had no rain out here except a couple of small rains. We've had less than 4 inches in the desert this entire year. So we're in deep trouble. And don't let the parks and the gardens and where you can use water where you are confuse you about that things are going to be all right. They are not going to be all right. Okay, so now I wanted to leave you just with one last thing, and that is when I work with people in my life right now at the drawing studio, I'm aware that often people are coming and they're starting to learn to draw at the age of 50, or they're starting to watercolor at like in midlife, or they maybe went to art school like some of you had at some point, and then life caught you up, and then you picked up your interest in art later in life, and so that what I think is very important. I in fact enjoy teaching people who are more mature when they start art than the kids who start art school at 18, because you bring to your art a richness of experience that has its own suchness, its own you-ness in it, its own how you've lived your life and raised your children, and how you love to cook, or where you traveled, or what you do about clothes, or what your relationship with color is. On and on it goes, so that you bring some inspiration that comes from places that until you recognize where in life you find your inspiration, then the skills of art have some work to do. So what I love about teaching people who are moving along in life is that once we locate the things that inspire you, and we blend that with the skills and the vocabulary you're learning from the visual world, we now have the possibility of actually creating a really inspirational career, not unlike Charles Birchfield or Georgia O'Keeffe. And you can have it in midlife, even though you didn't have it for the first 40 or 50 years of your life. They're available, but you've got to let go of the past. You've got to start exploring and experimenting with a lot more adventure and a lot more what I think of as risk-taking than you may allow yourself coming out of the conventional art learning that often characterizes how amateur classes are taught. And so I really urge you to look at what's special to you in life and see where you could go with your talent and your love of painting that you haven't even tried. Have you gotten to where you can throw things away, for example? or you can imagine the stuff I'm throwing away right now in order to find this new direction. But I'm having the time of my life, and it's a quality of exploring something new that I want for you as well.
Andy,
Okay,
I know that the people might have questions, but you provided such an amazing segue. I have to interject here before people start dropping out. You know, tomorrow is Terry Gay's, one of our gallery classes, painting plein air, getting ready to paint plein air. And Andy talks about walking in the desert and everything. I thought this was pretty cool. And for 6 weeks, we'll have 6 classes, a chance for you to take a risk, try something new, sort of ties right in, make those discoveries that Drew told us about, and it all tied together tonight. And it's not too late. You can sign up right after this session to take Drew's class if you're interested. And so we'll open it for questions. Remember to unmute yourself.
Good. Also, I just want to add, you've got amongst you an amazing teacher, Tad Lamb. I love Tad. I love your work, and I love the way you teach. And there's just so much to learn from you that I see. I'm so proud of having you as part of our drawing studio group.
Thank you very much. And I just have to say this crowd over here has been just a great benefit to me and my painting and just, you know, being a person. You know, I just can't say enough about this group over here at the Watercolor Guild.
Great, thank you.
Questions for Andy?
Okay.
Wait a minute. People are unmuting. Yeah, there we go.
I have one for him, but go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to ask Andy, you referred to a press several times. What sort of press are you talking about?
I'm sorry, it's so natural in my world. As most of the people who know me well, I'm a printmaker by trade. That's what I studied the most, and I used an etching press. We have 2 of them at the drawing studio where we teach, and I have 2 of them out here in my own studio here. So the etching press, it's a flat bed with a roller that you put metal plates through that imprints the ink that comes from the copper plate onto paper. And so I'm using that press, it's kind of like a tool in a die machine, in which I crush the inspired grasses that are covered with color or with color. I use the press to impress the shape of the grasses and the color onto the paper. So that's what I mean by using the press.
Thank you.
Sandra, you were next.
Pardon?
Sandra, you were next.
Yes, also Andy, am I unmuted? Also, Andy, you talked about spraying color.
Yes.
Spraying after you've got so much of it down, you're spraying something. Are you mixing color and putting it in a spray bottle and spraying that?
Exactly.
Oh, great.
Also, I want to tell you that I mostly use the gold and acrylic colors. I found that the Golden Company has done the best archival research on the permanence and the brightness of colors of any company that I've ever studied. And so I trust their colors. And for example, I don't put my things under glass anymore. My images can be washed with soap and water.
Wow.
if you needed to. I mount them. I do this. B. Mason has Lewis Framing, and she's become a very close friend of mine and helping me develop how to show these things. And so she takes the watercolor paper, coats the back of it with a archival adhesive, puts an archival foam core, and then she has a hot press that she puts it in the hot press. It's a big box that heats up, and then and presses it down, and then the glue, when it's heated, bonds the watercolor paper to the foam core, and so that the thing is perfectly flat. And then we Velcro that onto the frame, so that I work in about 4 different sizes, and so that way I can take an image out of the frame and put another one in, so I don't have to spend too much money with all kinds of frames. So so she helps me with that part of it. But it's the acrylics of Golden makes I love, and they don't need glass. And I mean, you can put some of them. Some people do put my pieces under glass, but I don't. I don't think it's necessary. And by the way, I learned that from Gary Pierce. Gary Pierce, I don't know if any of you know his name, but he was the great watercolor teacher of Tucson in the years when I first came here in 1958. And Gary lived for about 10 years. And in fact, he willed me all of his printmaking stuff after he died. But he never used glass over his watercolors. He coated them with the new acrylic adhesive varnishes, and because he didn't like glass over his paintings. And working with golden acrylics, neither do I. I think if you work in watercolor, probably it's a good idea. But the last word is not out about that.
More questions? Vladimir, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself if you have a question. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Where is he?
Okay,
There we
could you
go.
hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Hi.
Do you use, what kind of paints do you use for the canvas?
What kind of paint?
Yeah, do you use acrylics or?
I use acrylic paint made by the Golden Company.
Okay, acrylic.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sue?
I
Is that
assume
correct?
it's me. So I have kind of an esoteric question. I asked Mark Mahaffey this, but I'll ask Andy this too. I really have not studied art at all, but I really like some of the more abstract work. And I'm always curious as to exactly why. I don't know if I'm trying to find images in there, or mostly I'm attracted to color, but I wonder if there's something more basic about humans and art and abstraction that attracts us to this.
Well, a couple times a year, if I can continue to have some energy, I teach a once a week for 3 weeks course called Abstraction. And if ever you have an opportunity to take it, I invite you to join me in the future. So if you get the drawing studios, if you're on our mailing list and get our programs, I watch for it. Typically, abstraction as a word is used in the arts as a synonym for abstract art in general, which is, strictly speaking, it refers to art that is unconcerned with the literal depiction of things from the visible world. That's how often abstraction is used. However, as a word, it can, however, refer to an object or an image which has been distilled from the real world, or indeed like another work of art. Artwork that reshapes the natural world for expressive purposes is also called abstract. That which derives from but does not imitate a recognizable object is often called non-objective abstraction. In the 20th century, the trend toward abstraction coincided with the advances in science, in technology, and in changes in urban life. and eventually it reflects an interest in psychoanalytic theory. In other words, when you and I look at something, you're blocking out a lot of what you're looking at because you're looking from a point of a purpose. For example, if you sit down to draw a bottle, for example, there's other bottles on the table, or there's the tablecloth, or there's the wall behind the bottle, but you're making some choices to draw only this and not that. So that's, in other words, the first thing you do is you abstract what you're looking at. That is, you take out of context from the whole field that you're looking at what it is you want to study or express. So, and then if you come from, as for example, Matisse was born in the north of France in a village that had 157 looms. This is before the Industrial Revolution. These were people in the village that was known for hand making fabric that was used in the fashion industry in Paris. So that Matisse grew up with pattern. That's all he saw as a boy. So so if you look at his work, you can certainly say whatever else Matisse brought to us, it was certainly amazing patterns. That was his first understanding of what there was to paint. So in that sense, we could say the abstraction of his experience as coming from a textile village in France was always with him for the rest of his life. Now, I happen to think in Matisse's case that when he finally in 1911 or so went to Morocco, I think he smoked hash because something changes in his color. So it's something that I happen to know. Hash is a great colorizer in terms of its mental effect on the brain. And I also know that none of the museums in Matisse's time had any of the very medieval abstract, like the Virgin Mary is in a flat thing with the gold leaf, the linear gold leaf forming calligraphy around the edges of the garment, and they were icons that still are carried in the parades on the Day of the Virgin in Russia, and that Matisse's biggest collector was a man who was in the textile industry in Russia. Shushkin, his name was. And in 1912 or so, he invited Matisse to come see his collection and then took him to some churches where Matisse saw for the first time these medieval abstractions of flat shapes, the Virgin and Child and such kind of early religious art. At that time, those were not in the Louvre and they were not known to him. So we see that he was a series of abstract interests waiting to happen. And so that that's what I invite each of you to look to see what is in your life that is already inspiring to you, that once you recognize it, it becomes kind of the juiciest, most available and most deep, because emotion and your deep connection with something emotionally is the heart of the best work you're ever going to make. It's going to come because you have deep feelings for it. So sometimes in Matisse's case, that was color and pattern. And he found a way to bring it into modern life so that we all are astonished by how he contributed to us looking at the world in a new way. As an example, in Tucson, if any of you know the painter Jim Wade, who paints in acrylic and oil and very large works, one of his big murals is in the federal building downtown in the big lobby. I invite you to go there to see that if you haven't seen it. And I think that Jim is affected by by microphotography, which was not around when Picasso and Matisse were painting. That is, our ability to look below the level of the optical visible spectrum and discover colors that we never saw before, and organization of shapes and interaction of shapes on the micro level that I think has a strong influence in Jim Wade's painting, so that his nature includes what's below the level of the optics of the eye. And so you may have things in your life that you've done in science or in cooking or in sewing or someplace where you have sources of love of color or shape or objects that is waiting for you to recognize that they are the source of your inspiration. And I include that in what I mean by abstract.
Andy, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to thank Andy for his time and energy to put this together for us. I hope you had as much fun as we did.
I did. By the way, I have a book called The Nature of Drawing that's available through the Drawing Studio. That's a series of 40 or so essays on different topics about the nature of, because I don't think of drawing as drawing like in an art school. I think of it as the study of how we observe. And to the extent that you become interested in the act of observation itself, then what I call drawing has a great deal to teach us all, including painting. I don't think of myself as a painter quite. I think of myself as a printmaker. Even when I paint in watercolor, I think of it as just drawing in color. I don't think of it as like a painter. I think of it as I'm just looking at the world, but I'm adding a brush to my tools.
Well, again, thank you very much. We hope you'll come visit us down at the gallery when we open up, and we'll encourage everybody to come to the drawing studio for other classes.
Good. Kay, thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Andy.
Bye, you guys.
All right. I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Bye now.
Thank you, Kay.
You're welcome.